Hello and welcome to our brand new offering Global Lens, where we analyze and break down the impact of top geopolitical and economic developments on India. I'm Parikshit Luthra. Over the next 30 minutes, we bring you all the top stories from around the world. Let's start with the global headlines. More than 54,000 people in Gaza have been killed in the last 600 days as Israeli bombing continues unabated. Over 80 people killed overnight. Hamas claims to have agreed to a US ceasefire proposal, but Israel rejects the claims. Ukraine's Zelensky warns of a fresh Russian offensive. European Union allows Ukraine to use long-range missiles. Kremlin plays down Trump's comments, calling Putin crazy, terming it as emotional overload. US President Trump steps up the attack on Harvard University, threatens to take away $3 billion in grants and distribute it to trade schools across the US. Also moves to cancel federal contracts worth $100 million. Our top story: China's industrial profits have risen for the second month in a row in April. Growth improved despite US tariffs and deflationary pressures. This courtesy Beijing's stimulus measures aimed at supporting businesses. Cumulative profits at major industrial firms climbed 3% last month compared to a year earlier, now accelerating from a 2.6% growth in March. Amidst this backdrop, let's decode China's role in today's global setup and its ties with India. US President Donald Trump slapped tariffs of 145% on Chinese imports last month, forcing Beijing to retaliate. However, earlier this month, there came a pause in trade tensions between these two nations. US and China announced a 90-day suspension of tariffs. The move came alongside a commitment to significantly reduce existing tariff rates. Both nations reciprocally decreased tariffs by 115%. The US reduced tariffs on Chinese imports to 30%, while China reduced tariffs on American goods to 10%. Now, amidst trade tensions between US and China, India's trade deficit with China has surged to record levels and nears a $100 billion mark in FY25. Remember, India's trade deficit with China has widened consistently in recent years. From $48.6 billion in FY20, it declined slightly during the pandemic, but rose again to $85.08 billion in FY24. However, just last month, Prime Minister Modi had stated that competition between India and China should not turn into conflict, and that dialogue was key to a stable and cooperative relationship. Beijing welcomed those remarks, with the Foreign Ministry spokesperson likening India and China's future cooperation to a ballet dance between the dragon and the elephant, while India and China attempt to normalize ties. Pakistan's use of Chinese fighter jets and China-made air defense systems during Operation Sindoor has raised more concerns. So where does this leave ties between India and China? What is China and President Xi's larger plan to accelerate high-tech manufacturing? Joining us now to discuss this further is former Foreign Secretary and India's former Ambassador to China, Vijay Gokhale. Ambassador Gokhale, thank you very much for joining us. Let me begin by asking you, Donald Trump has spoken about making America great again, making products in America, but Xi Jinping and China are coming up with a Make in China plan for 2025. Tell us more about it, and what do you think?
Thank you for having me on the program, Parikshit. As you know, recently there have been a tariff war between China and the United States, with both the countries slapping very substantial tariffs on each other. The objective of both, of course, is to get greater economic leverage. China wants American markets. America wants to have more products made in the United States and to reduce its dependence on outsourcing. The problem, Parikshit, is that these two economies are joined at the hip, and therefore separation will damage both economies equally. In my opinion, therefore, the tariff wars are basically grandstanding, and both sides are likely to reach accommodation at the negotiations which will be held shortly. In the meantime, of course, China's priority is to continue its economic development, and particularly in the new sunrise industries, where it has a technological equivalence and perhaps even an advantage over that of the United States. So, in my opinion, the real competition between the United States and China will not be in the old industries, but in the technology industries. and on the question of currency. As you know, the United States dollar is today the only real global reserve currency. And the Chinese are determined that at some time in the near future, the renminbi should become a reserve currency. And therefore, I see a competition not only on technologies, but on the issue of currency. And how these two will compete will have an implication for the rest of the world, including for India. So what we should really be looking for is not the trade war between China and the United States or the call of President Trump to onshore to the United States, but in fact, how the technology war and how the currency war is going to impact on us.
That's a very important point, sir. So let's break down the technology war first of all. Now, we saw Chinese President Xi Jinping putting a lot of emphasis on manufacturing through innovation. He recently visited a factory in Henan region and said that China must continue to strengthen the manufacturing sector, adhere to principles of building self-reliance and strength, and cultivate a robust pool of high-quality talent to advance Chinese modernization. How would you sum up Xi Jinping's priorities? And when you speak about focus on high technology manufacturing, which are some of the priority areas for Xi Jinping?
So President Xi's priority, as far as the economy is concerned, remains similar to that of his predecessors, which is namely rapid economic development to make China a world-class economy. But the priorities have shifted over the last 10 years. Prior to 2017 or 2018, the priorities were GDP growth numbers, infrastructure construction, and exports. I think the priorities today are innovation, consumption, and risk management. And let me just dwell on each of these. Innovation is important because President Xi believes that China has to go up the value chain in order to remain a relevant and expanding economy. And therefore, from 2020 onwards, several key sectors have been identified and substantial investment has gone into them. This includes aerospace, high-speed computing, artificial intelligence, electric vehicles, high-speed rail, and advanced materials. In each of these, China wants to be best in class, and according to various accounts, it is extremely advanced in some of these and has perhaps overtaken the United States in a few of these sectors. So that is a reasonable success, I would say. Less successful is the second priority, which is to increase domestic consumption at a time when export-driven growth is flagging. Here, the president introduced the policy known as dual circulation, which was basically intended to stimulate domestic spending. However, due to a variety of reasons, including the falling GDP growth, the falling demographics, and also a stagnant savings for the domestic household, domestic consumption has really not picked up. And this is essential if China is to sustain 5 to 6% annual growth in the face of falling exports. The third priority is particularly important because President Xi is talking of risk management. In other words, of putting into place risk controllable, resilient supply chains, which will mean that outsiders or foreigners will not be able to interfere and therefore impede China's progress in key sectors. And what we are seeing of late, therefore, is the hardening of supply chains in areas like semiconductors, advanced materials, high-speed computing, and aerospace. The objective is that in addition to competing with the United States, it wants to deny the United States the ability to disrupt that supply chain. So I would say these are President Xi Jinping's priorities. He has had some success and some setbacks, but overall, I think the Chinese economy is still at a stage when it can grow substantially. Whether it actually overtakes the United States or not is a matter of conjecture. I wouldn't like to speculate upon at this time.
Right. You know, there are no winners in a trade war, it is often said, Ambassador Gokhale. But when we speak about the US-China trade tensions, they have arrived at a truce. The contours of a trade deal, how much the tariffs will go down, what products will get more market access, all that seems to be yet to be worked out. Having said that, do you feel that Xi Jinping has emerged as a winner in this tussle with Donald Trump right now, or not yet?
I don't think there is a winner as yet, Parikshit. As you correctly said, all that they have achieved is a truce. But even the contours of the deal, let alone the details of any trade deal, have yet to be revealed. As I said, because the two economies are joined at the hip, each side well understands that if it imposes tariffs which are extremely punitive, it will hurt them as well as the intended target. So my sense is that sooner rather than later, the two sides will come to some understanding in this area, and that will mean good news for the rest of the world. Notwithstanding that, however, we have to presume that in some cases, tariffs will remain. These might affect global supply chains. And therefore, in terms of Indian industry, we should be looking at which these sectors are and what, if any, impact there will be on India. As I said, the real competition between the United States and China is going to be in technology, because both sides are building what is called small yards with high fences. In other words, fencing off core technologies with barriers that are so high that it will theoretically be impossible for the other side to breach it to steal that technology. Now, the impact on the rest of the world, including India, will be significant, because until now, we had the capacity to choose which technologies we wish to use, and perhaps even to mix up the two where it suited us. But when these two major technology powers are at loggerheads, we might face a situation where if we use the technology of one, we are automatically denied the use of technology or equipment or intermediate goods relating to that technology by the other. And in the long run, I think that really pushes up costs for us. It imposes a cost on the economy, and we need to start thinking about it.
So now, to speak about the global south, India has emerged as the voice of the global south. But at the same time, we have seen China and 10 ASEAN nations completing negotiations on version 3.0 of China-ASEAN Free Trade Area Agreement. How do you think this will drive closer linkages between China and ASEAN, and what will be the impact on India?
So ASEAN is a major economic bloc at the crossroads of the Indo-Pacific, and China began to develop economic links with them from the mid-1990s. So in fact, by the end of the second decade of this century, China was deeply linked with the economies individually of the 10 or now 11 ASEAN countries, as well as ASEAN as a whole. And this has been deepened further because China is now, along with the ASEAN countries, an RCEP partner. As you know, India was also to join, but declined to join eventually. Now, as far as I'm concerned, China's relationship with ASEAN is important. But at the same time, ASEAN itself is seeking to diversify. They don't wish to become wholly dependent on the Chinese economy. And for this reason, they have engaged with us politically and economically. And I think they still remain keen that India should join RCEP, or if that is not possible, to improve upon the India-ASEAN FTA. I have always felt that our not joining RCEP may not have been an entirely wise decision, but of course that is for the government of the day to decide. What I do feel, however, is that we should not look to an India-ASEAN FTA solely from the angle that this gives easier access for China to dump goods in India. That is certainly one concern. It needs to be addressed. But we have to look at the broader picture. ASEAN is a population of 560 million people with a GDP roughly the same as India's, and an increasingly prosperous market. Not being in that market will, in a sense, disadvantage us, particularly because this is an economy in our proximity. And if the Indo-Pacific is India's karma bhumi, as it were, the platform for action in the next 10 to 15 years, then we simply cannot afford to ignore ASEAN, irrespective of whether China has good, fair or poor relations with them.
I'd like to speak about the recent India-Pakistan conflict, where we led Operation Sindoor targeting terror camps in Pakistan. How close was the cooperation between China and Pakistan during this conflict, according to you, Ambassador Gokhale? Because you're a very close China watcher. How has China's political influence in Pakistan increased since 2014, 2015?
Well, Pakistan has always been seen as a strategic asset since the early 1960s. And China has systematically cultivated Pakistan for a variety of reasons. Firstly, because it is, in a sense, at least in Chinese minds, a counterbalance to us. Second, it is a gateway to the Arabian Sea. And in a sense, it is one possible solution to their Malacca dilemma. Thirdly, they prefer that it is not part of the United States camp, because US military bases in Pakistan are seen by China as a threat to their national security. And lastly, of course, they believe that Pakistan's friendship will help in controlling ethnic fundamentalism in their own ethnic borderlands. So there are a number of reasons for this strategic relationship. We are just one of them. Now, really speaking, since 2015, all these reasons have become important to China. And China has decided to invest economically and strategically through what we know as the so-called China-Pakistan Economic Corridor. And I presume that this will get even more important for China now, because by the end of this decade, the PLA Navy, the Chinese Navy, is likely to have either a permanent or semi-permanent presence in the Indian Ocean. We know that the third carrier group is already being tested, and once it is fully seaworthy, it is likely to be deployed in the Indian Ocean. For that to be done, China needs friendly ports of call where it does overhaul and repair and so on and so forth, replenishment of supplies. They have a base in Djibouti, but Gwadar will become increasingly, in my opinion, a sort of base where the Chinese Navy will do its replenishments and repairs. That makes it even more of a strategic partner. So I would think that China's influence in Pakistan is slated to grow politically, economically, and militarily. It is facing some challenges, particularly attacks on Chinese assets and Chinese personnel by fundamentalist groups. It is also concerned at Pakistan's economic decline and its inability to pay for some of these projects. But in overall terms, Parikshit, China feels this is a strategic investment. It's not looking to get every dollar back, so long as it gets advantages in terms of national security. And that is the fundamental basis for this relationship.
So that brings us to the next question. How should India manage its differences with China? Ambassador Gokhale, how have we done in terms of managing the border tensions? And secondly, should India now revisit the FDI policy vis-a-vis China or not yet?
Well, I think I would characterize the progress as limited on the line of actual control. We have successfully disengaged at the various points on which we clashed in 2020. But to my knowledge, we have not yet gone to the second stage of de-escalation, which is moving troops back to agreed distances so as to further minimize the possibility of conflict. If you look at other parts of the relationship, we have resumed the pilgrimage, but we have not yet resumed direct flights, and the visa restrictions are still in place. On the trade side, the imbalance continues. And I don't think China is as yet ready to tackle this as a political issue. And so far as other economic activities are concerned, news that is coming out in bits and pieces suggests that some form of an informal sanctions is also being imposed against India. We hear news that critical tunnel boring equipment for metro systems has been blocked, export of equipment. We are hearing news that equipment for making the next generation of Apple phones in India is finding difficulty in getting exported. We know that a couple of Indian companies who were in joint ventures with Chinese companies for lithium ion technology have found obstacles in their way. And added to this, of course, is the recent conflict with Pakistan, which has dampened the mood and the enthusiasm so far as China is concerned, because like it or not, China did tilt towards Pakistan. So I would say progress is slow, but I think it is necessary to develop a new framework for the relationship. The old framework has, of course, collapsed. Because if we don't develop a new framework, then the current state of armed coexistence makes the relationship unstable. To the extent that you have a new political, economic, and structural framework, that relationship is easier to manage. I do believe, however, that there is wisdom on both sides. And I'm quite confident that our government is already thinking of steps to be taken to rebuild, or not to rebuild, to build a new framework.
Right. What would be that new framework? Because clearly there are challenges in India's neighborhood. We are seen as an alternative to China. We want to rise up as a global manufacturer, Ambassador Gokhale. But what do we need to do vis-a-vis China, and also for our own self-reliance globally as well? And that would be my final question to you.
Well, I think it's very difficult to predict what the framework will be. I think India's objectives are first and foremost to have a predictable relationship. You don't want it to be unpredictable. Secondly, you would like it to be a relationship based on the understanding that neither side will use force or threaten to use force, so that you use those resources better for economic development. And thirdly, I think we would like to leverage China's economy for our development, but that will depend on whether China is keen on investing in real terms. What do I mean by that? I mean, we would like to see greenfield Chinese investment, not investment in what is environmentally dirty industries or in the old manufacturing processes. And in the new areas, we would like to see some technology transfer, not simply an assembly plant in India, which is intended really to sell in the Indian market. If this can be something that China can consider, they will see that India responds positively. And at that time, I'm sure our FDI policy will reflect that. At this stage, however, I'm a little reluctant to advocate the cause for relaxing our FDI policy, simply because, in my opinion, China continues to look at us principally as a market, and its entire effort is market penetration and not partnering India in terms of industrial development or economic growth.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Vijay Gokhale, for joining us. That was the former Foreign Secretary decoding China and Xi Jinping's game plan. Let's move on and get you more international news in brief. At least 50 people have been injured after a car rammed into a crowd of Liverpool fans during the team's victory parade. The police have arrested a 53-year-old man who is believed to be the driver of the vehicle. Prime Minister Keir Starmer said that the whole country stands with Liverpool after this horrific incident. Pakistani Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif raised the conflict with India during his visit to Iran. Sharif made a peace offer and said Pakistan is ready to engage in dialogue with India to find solutions to long-standing problems, including Kashmir, water sharing and trade. Iran's leader Khamenei expressed hope that disputes between India and Pakistan will be resolved. Southeast Asian leaders held their first summit with China and the 6-member Gulf Cooperation Council in Malaysia to deepen trade ties amid tariff threats from the US. The GCC expects trade with the ASEAN to reach $180 billion by 2032. The leaders pledged to build a new model of cooperation against the backdrop of a shifting global environment. Britain's King Charles and Queen Camilla met Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney in Ottawa. The visit symbolizes a show of support for Canada amid US President Trump's threats to make Canada the 51st state of USA. King Charles is also said to become the first monarch to open the parliament in over 6 decades. Japan has lost its position as the world's top creditor nation to Germany after 34 years. This as Germany's stronger pace of asset growth in 2024 overshadowed Japan's record surge in net external assets. Germany's rise to the top is mainly due to its strong trade performance. China followed in third place with $3.5 trillion in net assets. European sales of Tesla vehicles plunged for the second straight month in April. This as the US electric car maker continues to face reputational damage regionally and rising competition. Tesla's sales fell 49% compared to last year in the region, as per the European Automobile Manufacturers Association. Shares of Chinese electric vehicle giant BYD fell for a second straight day amid growing concerns over regulatory scrutiny from Beijing. BYD's steep discounts across several models also stoked fears of a renewed price war in China's EV market. Time for a short break, but on the other side, we take a deep dive into Xiaomi's new EV launch and how it stacks up against Tesla. Back in a jiffy. Welcome back to Global Lens. This could be the next big headache for Tesla in China. Chinese smartphone giant Xiaomi has launched its second EV after the SU7. The YU7 SUV will compete with Tesla Model Y in China. This after Xiaomi's first EV, the SU7, has already beaten Tesla Model 3 in monthly sales since December last year. Tesla's Model Y is priced at $36,574 and YU7 is likely to be priced lower than that. Now, YU7 will go on sale in July, and currently Xiaomi has no plans for export of SU7 or the YU7 for that matter. But when it comes to key specifications, the Chinese car maker claims the YU7 is far ahead of Model Y. If the Model Y has a range of 719 kilometers, then the YU7 has a claimed range of 835 kilometers. If Model Y's top speed is 200 kilometers per hour, then YU7's claimed top speed is 253 kilometers per hour. In terms of acceleration, both cars are likely to deliver similar performance. It is actually in terms of charging time that YU7 could beat Tesla. If the Model Y can provide you 263 kilometers of range in 15 minutes of fast charging, then the YU7 can provide a range of up to 620 kilometers in 15 minutes of fast charging. But we must emphasize that this is what the company claims, and the car is yet to be commercially launched. In terms of size and dimensions, YU7 and Model Y are very similar. The battery pack specifications is something that a lot of car buyers would be attracted to. The Model Y has a 62.5 kilowatt-hour battery pack and an 80 kilowatt-hour battery pack option. And the YU7, on the other hand, has a 96.3 kilowatt-hour and a 101.7 kilowatt-hour battery pack, which is expected to deliver much higher range. YU7 also scores on the interiors. That's right, if Model Y has a 15.4-inch touchscreen, then the YU7 has a 1.1-meter hyper-vision panoramic display that could attract a lot of customers. This car could put more pressure on Tesla in the China market. One, because it is likely to be priced lower than Model Y, has a more luxurious design like a Porsche or a Ferrari for that matter, has more space for passengers in the second row. The YU7 will be challenging Tesla's best-selling car in the world, that is the Model Y. As we have seen, the SU7 has already surged ahead of Model 3 in China. The reason why this is important is because China is the second biggest market for Tesla after the United States. Tesla's China sales in April fell 6% year-on-year and 25.8% on a month-on-month basis. What's worse is that Chinese car maker BYD has already outsold Tesla in Europe in the month of April as well. All right, let's move on. Time to take stock of all the trending stories from around the world. French President Emmanuel Macron has rejected a widely shared video that shows his wife pushing his face away as they stepped off an aircraft in Vietnam. Addressing the viral clip, the French president said that it was a video of him joking and teasing his wife.
A video can be made to say a lot of nonsense. In these 3 videos, I picked up a tissue, shook someone's hand, and just joked around with my wife, as we often do.
The 2025 American Music Awards was a night to remember for pop artist Billie Eilish. She won all 7 awards that she was nominated for, including Artist of the Year and Album of the Year. Pop icon Taylor Swift, despite several nominations, was left empty-handed. Other notable winners included Bruno Mars, Eminem and Lady Gaga. Football legend Cristiano Ronaldo has hinted that he is set to leave Al Nassr with a cryptic social media post. The 40-year-old who joined the Saudi Arabian club in January 2023 is out of contract next month as the season came to an end. Ronaldo posted on social media saying, and I quote, "This chapter is over, the story still being written, grateful to all." Nepali Sherpa Kami Rita, also known as the Everest Man, scaled Mount Everest for the 31st time. He broke his own record for the most climbs up the world's tallest peak. Kami Rita first summited the Everest in 1994, guiding a commercial expedition, and has made the peak almost every year since. Kami Rita has previously told media how his climbs are just work for him. And before we wrap, here is the final cut. Thousands gathered in Istanbul to celebrate a toddler's victory over leukemia. After a courageous 2-year battle, the local authorities organized an event where colorful balloons were released, fulfilling the 3-year-old's dream. Take a look, and thanks for watching Global Lens.